Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are so glad you are here with us. Once again, we are here every Wednesday talking retirement. And as you notice, Dave Hall's not with us, but we have Dave Spence with us. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thank you, CR. Great to be here.
Wow, this is always exciting when I can get another Dave in replace of Dave to come on and talk about retirement. How cool is that?
Makes it easy for you, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Well, Dave, I want to welcome you to the show, and I want to have talk to you a little bit about what we do here if you haven't seen before. But we go and talk all about retirement. That's the one thing is we are so passionate about educating people in retirement. That's why we do this. That's why we're here. That's why we're a company, is because we want to help people understand the importance of planning for retirement. And I'd love your feedback on that.
Good. That's where my passion is now as well. I cut my teeth in the CPA world for 6 years. I kind of fell in love with dealing with the future instead of the past, frankly. I mean, I was proud of the work I did as a CPA, tax work, audit work. I did a little bit of everything. I loved it. But I really struggled when people said, well, am I on track to retire? Okay. Am I going to be able to put my kids through college? We have enough life insurance, and all of these things just fascinated me. And retirement is a big deal now because it's one of the biggest risks we face is running out of money. So it's a great time to be in the business, great time to be helping people.
And Dave, you're a CPA, and I noticed as we've looked through your bio and talked to you before, but you're pretty passionate about doing the CPA work. And I noticed you left that, or you're transitioning through that to become this financial planner. And I'd love to know, was that an easy transition? Do you have any regrets? And talk about that a little bit.
Wow. Well, it's not that I'm doing it now. I did that some 40 years ago. I came out, I was a CPA first when Reagan was president. I remember the tax rates being much higher back then and all that. And then, this was all before the internet and everything else. So I got into financial planning. I was one of the first 100 CPAs to get a CFP as well. But I just loved it. And one thing that had struck me as funny was that, instead of giving somebody advice and them immediately taking it and thanking me and paying me, a lot of times they just clammed up and were suspicious that I was selling something. So, that was the natural part of how you get paid. In some cases, you're paid a commission. In some places, you charge a fee. I was okay with anything as long as I was doing a good job. But I had to get through a barrier there where people kind of threw you into a category where it's like you can't be telling the truth if you're getting paid by somebody else,
Mm-hmm.
So it was a little tough at first, but I went back to my core roots as a CPA, and I thought about independence and objectivity. Those are the two things that make a CPA so special, I think. And I realized I was no longer going to be independent because I couldn't be, but that didn't mean I couldn't be objective. Now, there's a big difference between the two. So even if you're not independent, you can still be objective and do the right thing. So that's always been at the core of what I do, is find out what's out there. I needed to do a lot of learning on the other side so that I could hook people up with the right strategies and the right products. And I continued to maintain that objectivity so that I was doing the right thing.
So Dave, tell me what you're doing today, and tell me what your main focus is.
Well, after doing this for 35, 40 years, I've got a good group of clients, and I like to team up with other advisors. Most of my entire career, I would work with other advisors. I was called in usually as the expert to put together a financial plan or an estate plan or things like that. So I was always working with somebody else. And over the years, that's worked out really well because I've learned things from other people. They've learned things from me, and the customer's always getting two for the price of one, right? So I do joint work now with other agents. I try to match people up with other agents, and we kind of put our heads together and make sure we're doing the right thing for clients. But again, I'm kind of phasing out of doing the actual casework myself. But I've done, over a couple thousand financial plans and estate plans and things like that. So I still have a passion for it. Don't want to do all the number crunching and all that goes into it. But I'm working with other advisors to work with CPAs and just clients.
I love it. And Dave, one of the things, again, we talked about at the beginning, we're passionate about is making sure we have education, because the one thing for us is we don't want to just steer somebody to a retirement plan. We want to make sure that they're on board with us, and together we're able to help them get through retirement and not just to the door of retirement. And that's why we do the show. And that's why we invited you and to come and talk about this, because that's something we're passionate about, is that education side.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've always been big on taking the education. CPAs have to average on most states about 40 hours a year. And I probably averaged close to 100 my entire career.
Wow.
So I'm big on that.
That's incredible. Well, I'd like to welcome all those who are here with us live and those on replay. Thank you for being part of this journey with us today. And again, we have Dave Spence with us, stepping in for Dave Hall, who's traveling today. So it's easy to have Dave and Dave here. It works well for me, so I like that. So I won't screw up on any names today. But the thing we always do here, Dave, is we just ask questions that come in either through our audience or through a series of questions that come in our email. And so I put together a series of questions. And for those joining us live, I'd love to get your input as well and have you send in your retirement questions. And if we have time, we'll get those over to Dave also. So Dave, in order to get started, let me pull up my first question for you. This is one that came in from Tom. And this is, do you know if 401k plans allow for conversion of the employer contributions into the Roth part of the plan while the employee is still actively contributing?
Actually, that depends on the plan itself. That's one of the options that would be available to the plan designer, the plan administrator, the plan trustee. In most cases, that's not going to be the case. The employer is going to continue to get a deduction on their taxes for contributions that they put in. If you go to convert those, it's your tax bill, but you're going to be paying that without typically taking the money out. It's going to be a very difficult thing to do. There's some administration involved. There's 1099s that have to be issued. So I've found that very few are going to allow it, even if it's completely okay under the code.
So Dave, if we're looking at this and Tom's watching and saying, okay, so how do I start this? What would you say is the first thing Tom should do?
Just to start with the 401k process with the Roth. Yeah, you want to talk to your HR department, your payroll department. You want to see what's involved in switching from a pre-tax contribution to a Roth contribution. You can still put in the same amount of money. You can just make it all Roth. One more thing you might be able to even do is put in after-tax contributions. Some plans allow you to do that. That is, if you can put in the $26,000 or whatever the current limit is, and you can actually put in more, you can do more under some plans if the plan permits it. And that'll be a non-deductible type of contribution, just like the Roth is. And then you can convert that to Roth in there, and there should be no tax implications because you never got a deduction in the first place. So talk about the limits that you can do and get it started.
So if Tom goes to his HR team and says, hey, I really need to get into the Roth world, and they say, we just don't offer it, what advice do you have? Because I know people have come on our show several times and said, this is what I want to do. Our HR doesn't offer it. Or maybe it's a small fee, but their company's not willing to pay that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unfortunate when we find that. I think we're up to about 70% of the companies around the country will offer it. Yet only about 30% or so of employees are taking advantage of the Roth. So it really is something that everybody should look into. Now, if they don't offer it, you can still contribute to the pre-tax side of it. And if you want, like I suggest to people, you want to build up your Roth assets, then maybe you should just contribute as much as you need to get the full match, if there is a match, and then stop there, because you don't want to build up more in your second bucket, your tax deferred bucket. We want to get that down to a reasonable number and get everything into that third bucket, and contributing more than you get credit for or matched with. Even though it gives you a deduction now, you got to be thinking in terms of, I want the tax-free later, I don't want the deduction now. So just put in enough to get the match.
And I really appreciate that advice. And Dave Hull just recently taught a Roth webinar that we had through CPA Academy. And with that one, I want to talk about the word Roth, because with that one, anything, it seems like when we talk about the word Roth, it's a good thing, that people should be looking at this as something that says, hey, I need to be part of whatever it has to do with this.
Yes, absolutely. if you follow Dave Hall's advice, David McKnight's advice, Ed Slott's advice, all the major speakers and leaders out there in the industry, and most good financial planners are going to tell you, pay your tax bills now, build up your Roth accounts, even look at building up cash value life insurance or a life insurance retirement plan. These things go hand in hand, and it diversifies you from a tax standpoint. You want to have as many different things going. And Roth is one of the easiest ones to get started with. I say easy, but there are a number of rules involved. So you might have limitations. If you make too much money, you might have annual limitations that seem very small compared to what you'd like to do. There are rules about converting from a 401k Roth to an IRA Roth. There's all these little technicalities. You might need somebody like myself to help you through those. But you want to build up as many tax-free income sources as you can for when the tax bill gets higher, and it's going to have to.
So you talk about paying that tax bill now. Why is that so important to pay that today?
Well, like I said, I was out there. I was taking tax courses in the late 70s, and I saw where the tax rates had been up to 70% on people making a pretty high income, even 90%. So it's going to probably have to happen. When Reagan took office and he cut the tax bill down, that ended a 40-year period of time after World War II to mid-'80s when Reagan cut the tax laws. And that period of time, our rates were much higher than they are today. The entire 40-year period, even adjusting for inflation, somebody making $100,000 today might have been making $40,000 back then, but they still would have paid more in adjusted dollars in taxes themselves that year than we pay today. So if we have to use the same method to get out of the jam that we've built up now, and if we have to raise taxes to pay the bills, then we're going to face tax rates that are going to be similar to those periods of time. So you want to have Roth income coming in tax-free. You want to have cash distributions from insurance plans coming in tax-free. You might want to use a reverse mortgage even for tax-free dollars. You might want to have a health savings account that's funded, and you can use that tax-free dollars coming out to pay your health care. So you want to have a multiple of different sources. That's very important because they can change the rules on any one of them or two of them, and you want to have a multiple choice going for you there.
Such great advice. Well, let's move on here. We do have a comment here from Gary where he's just saying, good morning, Dave. So it's nice to see that
Gary.
He can still put Dave in there also and not have any mistakes. So that's great. So Gary's joining us from San Francisco. I know that it's either warm or cold, just depending on how close you are to the ocean, I guess. But Gary, thanks for joining us. All right, let's get over to my next question here. This one's from Lynn, so this one's a little longer. Bear with me as I read through this. The magic is figuring out what the future standard deduction amounts will be. We want to maximize that number to absorb taxable income and not try convert everything to tax-free. Do we just work with the current standard deduction numbers we have?
Yeah, I think good question. I think what you're talking about here is that if you don't drain everything out of your 401k, your pre-tax tax deferred bucket, if you don't drain everything out, you still could be okay because you're going to have a standard deduction or itemized deductions or whatever to shelter those dollars. So that's a good part of the strategy. The problem comes in as to this year and last year, we had much higher standard deductions than we did in the past before the 2018 tax law change came into effect. And when we go back to 2026, those higher ones are going to go away. So it's a moving target. It's a political type of thing. It's something that they can, maneuver themselves down the road. So I wouldn't put too much faith in it. I would take the tax deferred bucket down as far as possible. And, you could use today's, but I can guarantee it's going to be a different number when you get there. And we don't know if it's going to be better or worse, but it's probably going to be worse if we have to tighten the belts and pay the bills and wipe down the debt.
Yeah, I agree. So Dave, how do we hit this moving target?
Well, again, I would eliminate it. I would say that, you can take your income your assets down in your tax deferred bucket to something like 175,000 for a single, 300,000, 350 maybe for a married couple, and your required minimum distributions that would have to come out of that would be somewhere around the same amount as today's standard deduction. So that's the easy way to say, okay, and why is that a good thing? Because you didn't convert those to Roth and pay taxes on them. You waited and took them out tax-free because of the standard deduction. So that's the thing you need to understand. That's where the magic is. But because the rules are all going to have to change, and they're going to have to creatively come up with how are we going to tax the right people? How are we going to, help the people that can't afford to pay more taxes? So there probably will continue to be a standard deduction. And I would just kind of assume it might not be as high as it is today. And keep in mind, if you are a married couple and someone dies of the couple, halfway through the retirement or the, anticipated retirement period, now you've got somebody filing as a single taxpayer and they only get half as much of a deduction, but they're still just as much in the assets. So I'm not a fan of assuming a very big standard deduction down the road.
Well, I've got a few more questions I'm going to try to squeeze in here before we run out of time here. So let me get down to Priscilla, and as we talk about these required minimum distributions. She says, assuming I'm already retired and taking RMDs, why should I pay taxes today on a Roth conversion plus additional tax on Social Security instead of leaving the residual to my beneficiaries, which she said I just won't need it probably?
Great question, and I run into this all the time. Because we've done such a good job of saving money for retirement, but in a tax deferred account, unfortunately, and because the investments have done pretty well in the markets, a lot of people have more money in there than they're going to need. But let's think about it in terms of a generational thing. You mentioned beneficiaries, so I assume you have some people you want to leave the money to, and let's say they're your children. If you leave money to your children in a 401k or an IRA that has not yet been taxed, they're going to have to pay taxes on it. And they can't stretch it out over the rest of their lifetime anymore. They have to get all that money out in the next 10 years and pay taxes on it. Now, what do we think their tax bracket's going to be compared to yours today? If you don't need the money and you still take it out, you pay maybe a 22% tax or 24% tax. That may be double in the future for whether your kids have to pay taxes on it. So you might be wise to do the conversions, leave it into a Roth account. They inherit the Roth account. They don't pay any taxes. They still have to take it out within the 10 years and maybe invest it somewhere else where it's going to start generating taxable income, but they're not going to pay taxes on the Roth itself. So it's really critical to think about it in terms of who's ever going to pay the tax on this and at what rate.
And Dave, we have a lot of people that say, I don't want to leave anything for my kids. I want to be able to teach them how to do this on their own. And I've got other people saying they're working their whole life just to leave things to their kids. How do we help in this situation?
Yeah, I mean, this is know your client. This is, finding out what makes people tick. And that's what I've enjoyed the most about this career is everybody is different. And I have to laugh when I read Money Magazine articles where they tell everybody should do the same thing, right?
Yeah.
It really differs in every single case. So I think somebody has to think long and hard about how they want to handle the legacy part of their life. And, if they don't care at all about a legacy or they care more about charity than they do about any, family, then that should be all part of the basic planning that you're doing. And, if somebody wants to leave money to a charity, they can do that in their estate plan. And that IRA may never get taxed because it's going to get a deduction when it goes to the charity. So it's very important that you lay out all the goals and objectives and really kick the tires on it and think hard about what you want before you take some actions.
And I love that advice because we get so many people in here that if we do a case study, for example, they're going to compare themselves to, Bill and Tiffany and say, well, I want to be able to be like them and I want to be able to have that same retirement. But as you illustrated perfectly is that we're all different. Every one of us, you and I are going to have different retirement plans versus anybody else. And it's important, like you said, to to know your client and to help educate them so that way they're making the best decisions for them, and then they can work on their posterity and everyone else.
Yeah, and let me reinforce, that's what financial planning is all about, and that's what we want to do for people. We don't want to just sell stuff. We don't want to just push one concept or idea or whatever, and we don't want to work with people that don't really need the help. What we want to do is help people make all those right decisions. Now, I often say to somebody, it's like, I want to get to know you. I want to be in your shoes and know what you think is fast or slow or big or small. And then I'm going to go to the shelves back there where there's 100 different strategies and 200 different vehicles that can be used to get you where you want to go. And I'm going to narrow that down to the top 3 or 4 or 5, and let's talk about them and let's get educated on it and let's look at the pros and the cons and everything. And that's what's so fun about it. It's a lot of work to understand all the strategies and keep up to speed on it and all the tax law changes and all the products, but that's the joy of doing this right, knowing that it's going to be a win-win situation and you're going to help somebody beat the system, if you will, protect their family, reduce their taxes, all of that.
And we work with a lot of professionals that say, hey, I do a lot of this on my own. I do my own planning. Mm-hmm. And how do we help encourage them to continue to make the right choices? Because there's a lot of things we don't know, that we feel like we're making the right decision, but we in fact don't know the right decision, but we're just giving it a try. And I'd love your advice on what we can say to them to help them.
Well, it's funny. I'm putting together a series of videos that'll be out pretty soon. And it starts off with, do you ever wonder what you don't ever worry about what you don't know? And that's always been my case. As soon as I left the CPA world, I figured I didn't know a whole lot of stuff I needed to learn real quick. So that's why I did the 100 hours a year and all that stuff. And I got all the credentials and everything. So I think what would be the best advice is to sit down with somebody, have a consultation, whether you pay for it or it's complimentary, have a consultation and see if they don't, introduce some concepts that you might not have thought hard enough about, or you thought you understood, but maybe you didn't. So it's really a question of what's out there that you don't know. What is it that you don't know? And who can help you get there? And you need somebody that has a lot of knowledge and that cares enough to not just guide you down some path that's going to be good for them. And I say that because that's the majority of financial advisors out there. Unfortunately, that's what we have to compete with. A lot of people are trained right out of school. They're trained to sell a product, and that's how they get their foot in the door. I would look for somebody that has a few extra credentials and has a long track record with no legal issues and so forth.
Yeah. What wonderful advice. Well, I've got Gary said yes, where he's at right now. Brr, it is cold right now in San Francisco.
Yeah, he's got a question there on Backdoor Roth. Let's
see if I can pull it up here. So Gary said, can a mega backdoor Roth IRA sponsored through an employer be self-directed and invest in real estate?
Wow. Again, that's mainly going to depend on the plan itself. There's certain rules to satisfy the IRS, and then there's bells and whistles that can be added, and the trustee has to decide whether that's a good idea. Self-directed, there are a handful of plans. My son's in a self-directed plan. Within the self-directed plan, you can usually buy real estate as a real estate, ETF or things like that. But putting actual real estate into anything, especially a 401k, it's not going to happen. And when you talk about mega backdoor, mega usually is tied to a 401k. So I'm not sure if we've got an issue with the terminology here. But anytime you have a Roth and you've got real estate, you got to be extremely careful, because there are rules about self-dealing that can eliminate the values of an IRA, whether traditional or Roth. If you're self-dealing, and that can happen very easily when you have real estate like a rental property, because if you stay in the property, or if you get a tax break not a tax break, but if you have a loan, if you're paying a loan down, there's ways that all can be considered self-dealing. So real estate is tricky. I would do it through a publicly traded mutual fund or something like that if you want to diversify. But that again is most of the options are going to be up to your employer as to how many choices they're going to give you, including self-directed.
All right. Thank you. And Gary, thank you so much for that question. And I appreciate those live questions that come in. And again, if there's a question that you have and we don't get to today, you can always submit that at retirementriskadvisors.com/contact us, and we'll be able to get your question on one of our future shows. All right. So it looks like, Dave, we have one more question here before we'll have to end. Let me get this one pulled up here from Bill. Annuities are typically much more expensive than other investment options. Would you recommend them, and why?
I would recommend them. And here is why. Because when I use annuities for clients, we are doing it with the understanding that a piece of this picture has to be guaranteed. We have to shift the risk to somebody else. And there's a cost for that. But when we buy an annuity, we want, $5,000 a month coming from that annuity for as long as you live, $6,000 a month, whatever the number is, $500 a month. We are going to guarantee or shift the risk of that portion of your retirement. And that might cover, your fixed costs. It might cover your insurance premiums and this, that, and the other. But we know that money is always going to be there. And then the annuities can have great options that all come with a price. But I like some of the creativity that you can get out of annuity. And let me give you an example. I had a doctor who retired in his mid-60s, and a piece of his 401k was $500,000 that we allocated to an annuity. And this annuity guaranteed that $500,000 would go up with market performance or by a minimum of 6% a year or 7% a year. It was one of those. And this was all right before 2008, and the market, of course, crashed, and the $500,000 was worth $300,000. So the $300,000, and he's getting close to where he wanted to turn this on. But the guarantee that we bought had that value up to almost $700,000. So here he could turn on income based on $700,000, or he could take his $300,000 out and go cry, right? That guarantee was worth the world to him. And I even took it one step further. I called the insurance company and I said, we got a $700,000 value and a $300,000 value. If he converts that to Roth, what's the 1099 going to look like? How much is he going to have to pay taxes on? And they said, have you turned it on yet? And I said, no. And they said, it'll probably be closer to the 300,000. So we converted $300,000 to Roth, paid the taxes out of his other substantial assets, and we turned on a 7% distribution from $700,000 a year, $42,000 for as long as he's breathing, all tax-free. And you're not going to get that with other things that don't come with some guarantees. So you pay the price, but you make sure the guarantees are attractive.
And what do we say to those people who have, have questions about annuities? Because I know over the course of time, annuities have changed and people have been burned. But there's also, like you said, a very positive outlook for annuities right now, and depending on which one.
Yeah, you got to get somebody that understands them, and the rules are even changing for people that sell annuities to make sure that they're putting the interest of the client ahead. Now, anybody that has a credential like Dave and myself, we're going to have to be held to a higher standard from day one. So it's never been an issue for me, but it's good to see that they're clamping down on other people, making sure that they understand the products, making sure they compare the products, making sure the guarantees that they're paying for are matching up with their needs. So that's what you need. You need somebody that's got some experience out there and is independent enough to go to different companies and find out what's going to fit your situation best.
Well, very, very well said. Dave, this has been an amazing opportunity. We're getting close to time, so I do want to pop up and let everyone know. I'm going to pop up our banner here that Dave and Dave, it's the Dave and Dave Show. You guys are going to be here on March 1st starting at 11 a.m. and Eastern time, and you guys are going to go all the way for 4 hours and teach this webinar. So tell me about this webinar. I'm going to hide this back on the screen so everyone can see you, but tell me about this 4 hours of intense retirement learning.
Yeah, the basic theme here is we kind of tear apart the old paradigm. The old thing about you work for the same company for 30 or 40 years and you get a pension for the rest of your life. Those things have changed. We talk about a bunch of old paradigms, and we tear them apart and we say, here's what the new paradigms are. Here's what you got to know in order to get the best out of it. So we go through Social Security and Medicare, and we go through investments, and we go through taxes and so forth. A lot of different areas. We're just clipping the hedges on them to not get carried away in it, but you'll get a lot of great information about what's out and what's in and how you deal with it.
And that will be again March 1st, and you can find that at retirementriskadvisors.com. Go on there and you can get to also 4 hours of CPE along with this, which is an amazing part to add to that. But you can get all that again March 1st. Go on our website. You can find that and get signed up so you can hear more from you, Dave, as we get into the details of that. And I do want to thank you for spending this 30 minutes with us. It's been fantastic.
Hey, it was fun. It was fun. I love doing it, and I love to be a part of this. Looking forward to seeing everybody next week.
Yeah, that'll be fantastic. And for those, again, joining us live and those on replay, thank you for being part of this. And you can catch us every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central. We're always here, always talking about retirement, because we know how important it is to help you get through retirement and not to retirement. We'll see you guys again next week.
All right. Bye-bye.